The Easter Story.
One day, Jesus arrived to the city of Jerusalem riding a donkey. Everyone was excited to see him and laid palm leaves down for him to walk on. Everyone wanted to show their love and respect.
6 days before the festival of the Passover, Jesus and his disciples went to stay with some friends. As they were served a special meal, a woman opened a jar of expensive perfumed oil. She kneeled down and rubbed the oil onto Jesus' head. "You could have sold that and given the money to the poor," snapped Judas, one of Jesus' disciples. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "She is being kind."
But Judas felt angry with Jesus, and his anger allowed evil to creep into his heart. He knew that the chief priests didn't like Jesus, and he decided to help them get rid of him. 2 days before the Passover, he met with them and agreed to lead them to Jesus when Jesus was alone. In return, the priest promised to pay Judas 30 pieces of silver.
The evening before Passover, Jesus washed and dried the feet of his disciples. "Lord, you should not wash our feet," said the disciples. "You are too important. No one is more important than anyone else. We are all equal because we are all God's children," Jesus said. On the day of the Passover, Jesus and his disciples sat down to eat a special meal together. "Soon one of you will betray me," Jesus told them. Disciples were shocked, except Judas. "Who is it?" they asked, but Jesus would not speak of Judas's name. He blessed the bread and wine by saying a prayer, then passed it around. "Like this bread, my body will be broken, and like this wine, my blood will be spilled for many people. Eat and drink to remember me. We won't have another meal together until we are in God's kingdom," he said.
At a garden called Gethsemane, Jesus took Peter and James and John to accompany him while he prays. While he was praying, he knew that the priests were coming for him and felt afraid. While he was praying, his disciples had fallen to sleep, but he kept on praying for God to help him. Soon Judas entered the garden. Judas was followed by men armed with swords and fiery torches. "Rise," Jesus called. "Here comes the traitor." Peter, James, and John rose quickly, but it was too late. Judas walked up to Jesus and kissed him on the cheek. It was his signal to the guards that he was the man to arrest. The guards grabbed Jesus by the arms and held him tightly. Peter wanted to fight, but Jesus stopped him. "My Father in heaven will protect me," he said.
The chief priests took Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate questioned Jesus, trying to find out if Jesus was an enemy of Rome. He knew that the chief priests wanted Jesus dead, but he believed Jesus was harmless. Early the next morning, a large crowd had gathered. "Do you want me to release the King of Jews?" Pilate asked them. "No," the people shouted. "Crucify him." "Why?" Pilate asked. "What crime has he committed?" But the crowd just kept shouting, "Crucify him." Pilate was a weak man, and he wanted to please the people. So he had Jesus beaten and then handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers dressed Jesus in a purple robe to make fun of him. Purple was the color that kings wore, and they thought he had been pretending to be a king. They wanted to mock him and laugh at him. They even twisted together some thorns to make a crown. "Hail, King of the Jews!" they shouted, laughing at him. Jesus was forced to carry a heavy wooden cross through the crowded city streets. All the way, people jeered and shouted at him. It was very different from the way he had arrived in Jerusalem.
At 9 o'clock in the morning, the soldiers nailed Jesus to the cross. "Father, forgive them," Jesus whispered. "They don't understand what they're doing." The minutes crept by like hours, and Jesus was in great pain. It became harder and harder for him to breathe. A crowd gathered, shouting nasty things at Jesus and making fun of him. "If you were really the Son of God, you would have saved yourself," they jeered. "Come down from the cross." Jesus did not reply. He felt as if their breath was tearing at his body. The sun shrank away, and the sky became dark and stormy. But the crowd and the priests kept shouting their cruel words. Finally, at 3 o'clock, with a loud cry, the Son of God took his last breath.
Later that day, a Roman named Joseph took down Jesus' body, wrapped it in linen, and placed it in a tomb. Then he rolled a large, heavy stone over the entrance. Early the next morning, Mary Magdalene, one of Jesus' friends, came to visit the tomb. To her amazement, she found that the large stone had been rolled away. Mary stepped into the dark tomb and saw that Jesus' body was gone. All that were left there were the strips of linen in which he had been wrapped. "He is not here," said a voice. Mary turned and saw a man dressed in all white. He was an angel, but she did not know that. She gasped in fear. "Do not be afraid," the man said. "Jesus has risen. Go tell his disciples." Trembling with shock and overcome with happiness, Mary fled from the tomb and ran to find Peter and John. At first, Peter and John did not believe Mary's story. They followed her to the tomb and ran inside. "Someone has stolen the body," they cried. "Who could have done such a thing?" They went to tell the other disciples what had happened, but Mary stayed behind. "What shall I do?" she cried, tears running down her face. She was afraid to be there alone, but she did not want to go home either. "Mary," said a familiar voice. She knew Jesus' voice at once, but how could it be him? A man stepped forward. "Master," Mary cried, falling to her knees before him. "Tell the disciples what you have seen," said Jesus. "I will soon be there with my Father in heaven." Mary ran back to find the disciples. "I have seen my Lord with my own 2 eyes," she cried. "He has risen from the grave."